Morning, everybody. This is the day after Valentine's Day, and I hope you all had a great Valentine's Day. We did in our family, and my wife renewed our wedding, my contract for another year. It's a no-cut contract, and I'm hopeful that we can extend beyond that. And those of you who know my wife knows that she's a saint, and we're welcoming some saints here this morning. Not the New Orleans saints, but some saints nonetheless. To be honest with you, I hadn't really thought a lot about this issue that's before us today in the last year or two, but I think we're onto something here, and I'm excited about the hearing today. Senator Capito, Ben, and others really look forward to this hearing, what we're going to learn. But as I think you all know, today is the first Environment and Public Works Committee hearing of this 118th Congress. Senator Capito and I are pleased to welcome our newest members, Senator Fetterman, Senator Mullen, Senator Ricketts. Senator Ricketts, welcome. Great to see you again. Thanks for letting me come and visit with you earlier this month. And we're delighted to be here with our returning members as well, not the least of those, my wingman from Delmarva, the Senator Cardin, or Delmarva, I call them Delmarva buddies. There you go. Over the last couple of years, this committee has played a vital leadership role in passing historic infrastructure and climate legislation. Much of our success was, I'm proud to say, bipartisan. We have a couple of people here from Wyoming, and I quote another fellow from Wyoming who used to say when he was actually sitting right out where you are, Chris, and he said these words, he said, bipartisan solutions are lasting solutions. I see we've been joined by Senator Fetterman. Welcome, Senator Fetterman. I'm glad to see you. Thank you for joining our committee and being as a neighbor. We got Delaware, we got Maryland, we got Pennsylvania. This is pretty good combination. But over the last couple of years, this committee has played a vital leadership role in passing historic infrastructure and climate legislation. Much of our success was bipartisan. And looking ahead, I'm eager to work with Senator Capito, with all of our colleagues here, Democrats and Republicans as well, as we aim to build on that record of success and to further strengthen our economy at the same time. Together, I know we can continue to develop lasting solutions to some of our biggest challenges. That brings me to the topic of today's hearing, and that is exploring policies that support the development and deployment of low-carbon transportation fuels. As a senator from the lowest-lying state in our country, I can think of no greater challenge than the climate crisis. My colleagues have heard me say that more times than they want to remember. Delaware is the lowest-lying state in America. Our state is sinking. The seas around us are rising. That's not a good combination. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to address that and create economic opportunity for the rest of our country. But last year, some of you may recall that the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, affectionately known as NOAA, reported that there were 18 climate disasters in the United States with losses exceeding $1 billion each. 18, exceeding $1 billion. They also reported that a year ago that sea level rise is occurring even faster than predicted, Those 18 costly disasters underscore the urgent need for further action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to limit the impacts of climate change. We were reminded by Albert Einstein years ago that in adversity lies opportunity, and that's true here as well. And those opportunities are, frankly, enormous. And by tackling the climate crisis, we can continue to fuel the growth of clean energy jobs in our country and reduce our dependence on foreign oil. Again, to our newest members of this committee, including neighboring Pennsylvania and Senator Ricketts as well. My colleagues have heard me tell once or twice the story of a guy named Willie Sutton. I don't know if you ever heard of Willie Sutton. He's a famous bank robber, and during the Great Depression, and finally got caught. He was dragged before the judge and jury and everything. And the judge said to him famously, "Mr. Sutton, why do you rob banks?" And he replied, "Your Honor, that's where the money is." And when people ask me why do we focus on reducing transportation emissions, I say because there's a good deal of that's where a good deal of the emissions come from too. For some time now, our nation's transportation sector has remained the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S. economy, accounting for more than 25% of emissions in America. I think power plants account for close to 25%, another 20% from our manufacturing operations, think cement plants, think steel mills, and so forth. But through the bipartisan infrastructure law that we all participated in crafting and passing, and the Inflation Reduction Act, Congress and the Biden administration have made significant investments to support American clean energy and zero-emitting vehicles, while also securing the domestic supply chain of critical minerals for electric vehicles. Many Americans, including several members of the committee, are making the switch to electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. And still, there's more that we can and must do to support cleaner fuels for vehicles on our roads and provide greater certainty and flexibility for those who produce these fuels. As a recovering governor, while exploring ways to improve federal policies, I often look to see what's working well in the states and try to replicate those efforts. I call the states laboratories of democracies forever, and they have been forever, and they continue to be laboratories of democracies for us to learn from. States have learned from the federal government's mistakes when it comes to programs like the Renewable Fuel Standard. Many states, including Oregon, including California, have implemented or are considering implementing technology-neutral, low-carbon fuel standards. And these state-level programs have successfully advanced the production and use of cleaner fuels and kept consumers and compliance costs low, while fostering local investment and job creation. As we will hear today, these state programs have fuel flexibilities, greater long-term predictability, and cost containment mechanisms that are not included in the Renewable Fuel Standard. Unlike the Renewable Fuel Standard, existing state programs often focus more on emission reductions potential when determining what qualifies as a clean fuel. And in addition to reducing the number of questions the states have to ask when determining which fuels qualify for a clean fuel program, the structure allows multiple options for obligated parties to comply. For example, a wide range of stakeholders, including the Delaware City Refinery, about 20 miles from my house down the Delaware River. Those stakeholders are interested in producing clean hydrogen as a qualifying clean fuel. They believe they can do so with their existing infrastructure to secure a stronger financial future and create new jobs. That is why we've invested significant federal resources to support the development of clean hydrogen infrastructure in our nation. However, unlike existing state-level programs, the Renewable Fuel Standard does not currently consider hydrogen a clean fuel. Increasing the production and use of clean hydrogen is a key to reducing emissions in sectors of our economy that are difficult to decarbonize. Think large trucks, think like buses, big buses. And the challenges with the Renewable Fuel Standard do not stop at hydrogen. And as we're going to hear today, there are challenges across clean fuel stakeholders, including biofuels, which we can address by moving forward a more technology-neutral approach. With that, I welcome the discussion of the benefits of establishing a federal low-carbon fuel standard, a program that can provide certainty, provide predictability, provide flexibility for all stakeholders, while also spurring innovation across clean fuel technologies to help us meet our ambitious climate goals. My hope is that today's hearing is the first of many conversations on how we can bring industry together, along with environmental groups, along with agriculture and stakeholders, to further decarbonize our nation's transportation fuels while also supporting job creation across our nation. We look forward to hearing the perspectives of each of our witnesses here today. Before we do that, I want to turn to our ranking member, Senator Capito, for her opening statement. Senator Capito, great to be with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the witnesses for being here today. And I think we've got a great panel, so we'll get to learn a lot about this. For those unfamiliar with a low-carbon fuel standard, it is a regulatory process meant to advantage fuels that generate lower carbon emissions in their production and use over fuels that emit more. This may be achieved through financial incentives funded by the taxpayers, decreasing quotas or limits on market access for more emissive fuels, or a combination of the two. I'm very concerned by the concept of empowering bureaucrats to decide what fuel sources qualify how and what associated phase-outs may look like. It sounds like a combination of social cost of carbon and centralized economic planning. We have watched administrations of both parties seesaw on the execution of regulatory programs that impact American energy prices, with experience revealing that heavy-handed regulatory approaches inevitably lead to reduced supplies and higher prices. Perhaps nowhere has the tug-of-war been more obvious than the EPA's renewable fuel standard. Speaking of that program, in December, EPA proposed the new RFS set rule to establish the required volumes of biofuels to be blended with conventional gasoline and diesel for the next 3 years, 2023, 2024, and 2025. As part of this proposal, EPA has allowed automakers contracting with certain renewable electricity producers to generate compliance credits, known as RINs, for the first time in this program. In fact, EPA says in their proposal that they are using the creation of electric RINs, or e-RINs, which have a cash value to incentivize increased vehicle electrification. Yet another subsidy for EVs was not congressional intent, nor is it a reasonable interpretation of the statute. This e-RIN proposal has aggravated proponents of the RFS, critics of the program, and environmentalists alike, a rare trifecta. The fact that it is also formulated without any political accountability should cause us all significant concern. Speaking of things to be concerned about, one state that has taken a lot of action recently on transportation fuels is California. California was the first state to adopt the LCFS. It is no coincidence that California's gas prices are more than $1.20 higher than the national average due to its regulatory policies and taxes. A study from the Stillwell Associates found that California's LCFS by itself is added 22 cents per gallon in 2022. Oregon and Washington have followed suit in establishing their own LCFS programs and have seen their gas and diesel prices rise. Last September, fuel prices in Oregon spiked 50 cents per gallon, the sharpest spike of any state in the country. Washington's cap-and-trade and LCFS programs went into effect at the start of the year. And according to state legislators and Washington Independent Energy Distributors Association, gasoline has gone up by more than 34 cents per gallon and diesel by more than 43 cents on average as a result of the two policies in the past month and a half. This stacked LCFS and other environmental regulations and taxes mean the residents of the West Coast states face the highest fuel prices in the lower 48. But don't worry, if these prices make your eyes water, you can just buy an EV. California is requiring 100% of new vehicles purchased to be zero emission by 2035 through its advanced Clean Cars 2 rulemaking. That target means higher costs for consumers to buy still scarce electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles and the potential disruption of interstate commerce. According to Kelley Blue Book, the average price of an electric vehicle in the United States as of August of 2022 was $66,000. That is more than the median household income in my state, which is $50,000. I don't have anything against EVs, and we'll eventually get there, but I think people should be free to buy the vehicles they want and can afford. It does not help that California has some of the most expensive and least reliable electricity in the country, with even greater challenges ahead as nuclear and natural gas plants are forced to retire and the transportation sector is electrified. But those electricity prices can be a subject for a future hearing. Looking at the statistics on fuel and vehicle prices at a time of significant and sustained inflation, I doubt my state and many others, particularly in rural America, will want to import the West Coast's policies, which will also bring higher prices for, at best, hypothetical climate benefits. This is especially true at a time of sustained high inflation, which, despite monetary policy and the Inflation Reduction Act, inflation remains stubbornly predicted to be between 4% and 6%. We saw the figures yesterday of over 6%, well above the 2% target of the Federal Reserve, and is being forecast by groups like Apollo Global Management to be stuck there for the near or medium term. And LCFS and these other cap-and-trade regulatory processes will only accelerate and lock in those price increases at a time when America, households, and businesses can least afford it. I look forward to the testimony, and thank you again. For the
Thank you, Senator Capito. As our new colleagues that probably don't know this, I go home at night, almost every night to Delaware, and able to take the train. And I drive by every morning when I head for the train station. I drive by a BP station, where I bought gasoline for like 20 years for my 2001 Chrysler Town and Country minivan, which had 600,000 miles on it when I sold it for $1 last year. And I don't no longer stop at the station to get gas, but every day I look at the price. And I noted that yesterday the price was $4.17, which is down by, I think, by more than $1 from where we were maybe this time last year. And my hope is it'll continue to trend down. We'll see. But anyway, we're going to have a healthy debate here, and Senator Capito and I, we may have some differences here. This is something I'm just learning about, and that's why we're having the hearing. And hopefully we'll all learn something, and maybe we'll learn that there's a way to find the joint forces and move together down this road. I hope so. But now we're going to turn to our esteemed panel of witnesses. In a few minutes, we're going to hear from them in this order. And first is Michael Graff, Chairman and CEO of American Air Liquide Holdings Incorporated. He's also Executive Vice President and Executive Committee member of the Air Liquide Group. Delighted to see you. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your presence in our state. Second, we're going to hear from Jeff Cooper, President and CEO of the Renewable Fuels Association. And finally, from Chris Spear, President and CEO of the American Trucking Association. Chris, very nice to see you again. And we're now going to begin our witness testimony. I'm going to ask Mr. Graff if you'll proceed with your statement. Your entire statement will be made part of the record, and you may proceed as you wish. Thank you so much. Welcome. Go ahead.
Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and members of the committee. On behalf of Air Liquide's more than 20,000 employees in the United States.
Excuse me, let me interrupt for just a second. My staff reminds me, it was not 417, it was 317. 317. You're right. No. 317, and hopefully it'll continue to drop. I think it will. We'll see. Thanks.
On behalf of our 20,000 employees in the United States, I thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Mike Graff, and I am the Chairman and CEO of American Air Liquide, a world leader in sustainable technologies and solutions that help decarbonize the planet and advance a clean energy economy while creating high-paying careers. It is a pleasure to be here today with Mr. Cooper from the Renewable Fuels Association and Mr. Spear from the American Trucking Associations. I want to thank Mr. Spear and the ATA, with whom we worked closely during the pandemic to ensure patients and hospitals had the medical oxygen they needed to save lives. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, it was Air Liquide's honor to host you, the Secretaries of Energy and Labor, and the National Climate Advisor at our Innovation Campus, Delaware, last August. We share a core belief. Clean energy is about lowering emissions and growing our economy while creating new value-added jobs. As the committee considers the establishment of a national clean fuels program, we urge you to ensure that any proposal is technology neutral and enables emissions reductions through certainty and flexibility. These are essential to promoting private sector investment, creating jobs, and minimizing burdens on the American consumer. Hydrogen plays an important role in decarbonizing the transportation sector, and Air Liquide is at the forefront of that effort. In Nevada, Air Liquide has invested $250 million in the first world-scale liquid hydrogen production facility with the capacity to supply renewable hydrogen for over 40,000 zero-emission hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Much of this hydrogen is supplied to California under its LCFS. Leveraging the versatility of hydrogen and regional energy ecosystems, Air Liquide is also involved in many hydrogen hub proposals, which include decarbonization of the transportation sector. Mr. Chairman and Senator Fetterman, as mentioned, Delaware is home to our Innovation Campus, and Pennsylvania is home to 1,400 Air Liquide employees and is the headquarters of Airgas, an Air Liquide company. A hub here could unite the East Coast transportation system with the necessary renewable fuel infrastructure. Ranking Member Capito and Senator Cardin, an Appalachian hub could leverage the region's abundant supply of natural gas, joint with carbon capture, to produce low-carbon hydrogen. Senators Sanders, Whitehouse, and Markey, NYSERDA is leading the effort to convert the Northeast's abundant wind and hydropower to low-carbon hydrogen via electrolysis, which Air Liquide already does in this region with the world's first industrial-scale PEM electrolyzer. Similar initiatives are underway in the Midwest, the Southwest, and the Gulf Coast. Any clean fuels program must have flexibility at its core to fully leverage hydrogen within the local energy ecosystem. Air Liquide is a significant low-carbon fuel supplier that gives us insight into clean fuels programs like the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard and the nation's Renewable Fuel Standard, and their effects on private investment and on the market. First, the California LCFS has reduced CO2 emissions while stimulating private investment. Senator Padilla, the hydrogen and renewable natural gas that Air Liquide supplies to the California transportation market falls under the state's LCFS. And we also supply hydrogen for the refining industry, which is also subject to the LCFS. Second, the California LCFS employs a performance-based carbon intensity target and a fuels evaluation methodology that is agnostic about technologies and feedstocks. This is a key feature of the program designed to maximize the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. However, given the number of fuel pathways requiring approval, a streamlined process through pathway standardization would be beneficial. Third, policies that enable the use of renewable energy credits and environmental attributes enable investments that best use regional resources, infrastructure, and technologies to meet targets, and increase the supply of low-carbon and renewable energy, ensuring consistency in the use of RECs and EAs across all feedstocks and process energy, and it avoided emissions rules would make the California LCFS more efficient. Finally, the pathway approval process for the Renewable Fuel Standard is significantly delayed. Like many entities, Air Liquide has pending RFS pathway petitions. Ours seeks to qualify hydrogen from renewable natural gas. Despite favorable review by EPA, these pathways have not advanced. The RFS pathways process needs to be transparent and timely in order to advance the nation's emission reduction goals. In conclusion, we urge the committee to ensure that any national clean fuels program is technology neutral and enables emission reductions through the program's certainty and also flexibility. Thank you for inviting me to participate today, and I welcome your questions.
Mr. Graff, thanks so much. Great to see you, and thank you. Our best to you and the team you lead back in Delaware and across the country and around the world. Thank you. Mr. Cooper, Carper welcomes Cooper.
Well,
Capito welcomes Cooper.
Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and members of the committee, good morning. My name is Jeff Cooper, and I am the President and CEO of the Renewable Fuels Association, the leading trade association for the U.S. ethanol industry. I appreciate the opportunity to share our industry's perspective on the future of low-carbon fuels and the potential for a federal clean fuels program. The transportation sector, as you said, Mr. Chairman, is the leading contributor of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States, accounting for nearly 1/3 of total emissions annually. Although transportation emissions have fallen slightly from their peak in 2006, the pace of emissions reduction must rapidly accelerate in the years ahead if we are to meet the administration's goals of net zero emissions by 2050. We believe a properly structured clean fuels program offers the best opportunity to rapidly reduce carbon emissions from the transportation sector while simultaneously enhancing energy security, creating jobs, and reducing tailpipe pollution linked to poor air quality and health challenges. RFA supports the development of a national program that is truly technology neutral and performance-based. In essence, the Clean Fuels Program sets annual greenhouse gas reduction requirements for the transportation sector, and then it allows the marketplace to determine the most efficient and economical ways of achieving those reductions without dictating the use of specific fuels or vehicles. Under a well-designed policy, we believe renewable fuels like ethanol offer an effective and immediate solution for decarbonizing the transportation sector, including light and heavy-duty vehicles, rail, marine, and even aviation fuels. Today's corn ethanol already cuts greenhouse gas emissions by approximately 50% on average compared to gasoline. With increased adoption of low-carbon farming practices, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and other technologies, the U.S. ethanol industry is well on its way to producing net zero carbon corn ethanol. In fact, RFA's member companies have pledged that the ethanol they produce will achieve a 70% reduction compared to gasoline by 2030 and a net zero carbon footprint by 2050 or sooner. Clean fuel policies have already been implemented at the state level, as you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, and several countries are beginning to implement their own programs. While existing state programs like the California LCFS have been successful in reducing emissions and driving investment, certain design shortcomings have at times undermined the technology-neutral intent of those programs and limited the ability of some low-carbon fuels to provide greater greenhouse gas emissions benefits. Still, ethanol and other liquid biofuels have accounted for nearly 3/4 of the total carbon reductions that have been achieved under the California LCFS since it began in 2011. If implemented on a national scale, a clean fuel program will need to be designed in a way that avoids picking technology winners and losers and drives the greatest greenhouse gas emissions reductions at the lowest cost. A nationwide program should, 1, use consistent science-based and transparent life cycle analysis methodologies, like the Department of Energy's GREET model, for determining the carbon intensity of all fuel and vehicle options. 2, it should set clear and predictable annual greenhouse gas emissions reduction requirements and then stick to those targets. 3, it should adopt rules for credit generation that are consistent across all fuel and vehicle pathways. 4, it should include flexibility for low-carbon fuel producers to demonstrate process improvements and carbon intensity reductions across their entire supply chain. And 5, it should include complementary measures to remove technical and regulatory barriers that artificially limit greater use of certain low-carbon fuel options, like the current barrier we have in place today that prevents the sale of E15 during the summer months. In closing, we believe a well-designed national program has enormous potential to quickly reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector and help our nation achieve net zero emissions by 2050. We look forward to working with the committee as it continues to consider a nationwide clean fuel standard. Thank you again, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Cooper, thanks. Great to see you, and thank you for joining us. We've been joined by the senior senator from the state, a great state of Michigan, Debbie Stabenow, who's also a member, not just a member of the Ag Committee, but she's chairman of the Ag Committee. She and I serve on the Finance Committee together with some of you. And the Finance Committee is going to have a confirmation hearing this morning for the nominee, the administration's nominee to head up the IRS, Danny Werfel, not the football player, Danny Werfel, who's the public servant, and he's invited me to come and introduce him, and I'll be slipping out in about 10 minutes or so, but I'll be back shortly. And Senator Capito has agreed to hold the gavel until I get back. All right. So now, Chris Spear. Chris, I already gave you a short introduction. I'll just say again, it's great to see you and welcome. Thank you very much for all you do and for your testimony today. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Capito, and members of the committee. I really appreciate the opportunity to testify on behalf of the American Trucking Associations. For 90 years, the ATA has helped Congress shape solutions to our nation's energy and environmental challenges, and today's hearing is no exception. The trucking industry starts with yes. The ATA was a proud supporter of the bipartisan IIJA. Prior to passage, ATA testified 25 times before the House and Senate, including this committee, sharing how our nation's decaying infrastructure has given competitive aid to rising global powers like China. In short, our first world economy cannot survive with third world infrastructure. Thank you for recognizing that. To predict the future of low carbon transportation, one should start with the IIJA's ability to eliminate congestion. Right now, our industry loses $75 billion a year sitting idle in traffic. That's 425,000 drivers sitting for an entire year. That's 6.87 billion gallons of wasted fuel, pumping 67.3 million metric tons of CO2 into our environment. In short, if you want to eliminate emissions, start with the top 100 traffic bottlenecks. of which 22 are in states represented by members of this committee. IIJA monies are more than adequate for fixing existing roads and bridges, and there's plenty more for new capacity too, including truck-only lanes, bypasses, bridges, and parking. There is no reason this administration should have to pick favorites. Another example, ATA worked with the EPA, producing phases 1 and 2 emissions reduction rules. To date, 98.5% of all emissions have been removed from our tailpipes. In fact, 60 trucks today emit what one truck emitted in 1988. These 2 rules alone cut CO2 emissions by 1.37 million metric tons, saved $220 billion in fuel cost, and reduced oil consumption by 2.5 billion barrels of oil. And the ATA and the EPA created the Smart Way program, saving participating fleets more than 4 billion gallons of fuel, over $19 billion at today's costs. Those fuel savings resulted in massive emission reductions of 2.7 million short tons of nitrogen oxide, 112,000 short tons of particulate matter, and 143 million metric tons of CO2, all by putting the safest, newest, and most environmentally friendly equipment on our roads. This is not a debate about if we get to zero, but when. We will get there, not just on the timelines proposed by California. They're excluding our industry in a mad dash to zero, makes their timelines and targets not only unachievable, but guarantees they will fail. To get to zero, we have to be honest and we have to be transparent about the road ahead. Sourcing rare materials needed for millions of 5,000-pound truck batteries, the infrastructure needed to charge them, and the additional electricity needed to power our trucks full scale doesn't yet exist and won't if you allow California to set the nation's standard. Trucking now moves 72.5% of our nation's freight tonnage. Over the next decade, trucks will be tasked with moving 2.4 billion more tons of freight than they do today. The moment that slows or stops, Americans, your constituents, are going to want answers. The responsible approach is also the realistic approach. Achievable timelines and targets do matter. The ATA will continue supporting policies that are responsible, realistic, and inclusive of our industry. Our written testimony provides this committee with just that, targeting IIJ monies to reducing congestion, creating cost parity between current and future equipment and fuel sources, and the low-hanging fruit, such as drayage, port interconnectors, and safe, secure truck parking. We're committed to a cleaner environment, and we've proven it. We simply ask that we be realistic about the path forward. Do that, and we'll post the best environmental gains possible. I thank the committee and yield.
Thank you, Mr. Spear. I'm going to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from Consumer Reports asking EPW to pursue a clean fuel standard to decarbonize the nation's transportation sector. With that, I'm going to slip out and go over to the Finance Committee and introduce Danny Werfel, and I'm going to yield to Senator Capito to preside in my absence. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Spear, I talked in my opening statements about the prices of diesel and how they've been at a record high in June of 2022. Can you talk about the impacts of when these prices are way up like they are and have been for a sustained period of time? What impact that has on your industry and how it impacts the small businesses, many of them small businesses, some quite large, across the country?
It's significant, Senator. Fuel costs are our second highest cost, just under labor. Under that, you've got safety, including training. It's a lot of important operational expenditures, but fuel is our second highest cost, and that was before we went to 40-year highs on inflation. It should come as no surprise with this standard in California and Oregon. We have litigated it directly because of the cost impact that it has on our industry, particularly those that are running 20 trucks or less or owner-operators, one truck.
Are you in the middle of that litigation right now?
We are indeed.
Yeah. Okay, so
are indeed.
would you say then that these regulations, and as I said in my opening statement, are leading to higher prices in those particular states?
Yeah, we were dealing nationally with 40-year highs on inflation. These two states compounded that problem, which is why you see fuel costs exceeding $7 in California, nearly $6.50 in Oregon. That's much, much higher than the national average, as you said. But if you're a small carrier, an owner-operator, you don't have the luxury of a fuel contract. You're paying retail at the pump. So you're absorbing that cost into your operational expenses. So it's chipping away. You're going to see consolidation in our industry as a result, and it's going to hurt the very small businesses that this committee, says it supports.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Graff, I think that Appalachian Hydrogen Hub sounds really good to me. And thank you for what you're doing to lend your expertise. And I know we're in competition with a lot of good ones, as you mentioned, but I appreciate you mentioning that. Let me ask you a question. I think this is an important question when we're all looking at what the environmental impacts can be. You mentioned, Mr. Cooper mentioned life cycle. So in order to get to an EV, in order to get to a hydrogen car, there's a lot that goes before you actually are at the tailpipe, I guess is how they say it, measuring and before the tailpipe. So a life cycle. Have you done an analysis of that, of what it takes to create the hydrogens and that goes into these vehicles, and how the emissions? I guess I'm focusing more on emissions than cost, although we know that does drive up the cost if you have to do another process before another process. What are your thoughts on that, on a life cycle analysis?
Thanks for the question, Ranking Member Capito. Clearly, we need to look at every aspect of basically well-to-wheel, so to speak, in the approach for any pathway to produce energy, and understand its emissions potential and how we address that. In terms of hydrogen, we have been in the business of producing and transporting and utilizing hydrogen for over 60 years. And we have the full capabilities to make sure that hydrogen itself is well managed, it's well contained, and its fugitive emissions, as you consider its impact on the environment, are genuinely more second order. I think we look at safety, we look at what we can do to make sure that there is the safe transport, the safe production, the safe use of hydrogen. But any fugitive emission of hydrogen into the atmosphere has a much lower effect than other hydrocarbons or other substances that may end up in the environment.
Okay, Mr. Cooper, on the ethanol, obviously there is an expenditure of a great deal of energy to make ethanol. How would you answer that question on life cycle, both emissions and cost?
Yeah, we fully support a well-to-wheels, full life cycle approach when analyzing the carbon intensity of all fuel pathways. And we agree that in particular, when you talk about electric vehicles, we often hear them referred to as zero emissions vehicles. Well, that's ignoring all of the upstream emissions associated with electricity production. But for corn ethanol specifically, the Department of Energy analyzes in great detail that full life cycle energy use and emissions involved with farming and harvesting the corn and processing that corn into ethanol. When you add all of that together, corn ethanol has an emissions footprint that is about 50% lower than gasoline. So that does include all the farm inputs and all the energy used on the farm all the way through the process to the retail gas station, about 50%.
Let me ask Mr. Graff a quick question too. Does California have like personal vehicles that are hydrogen? That doesn't exist right now, does it? In any large measure?
Ranking Member Capito, there are currently 15,000 hydrogen fuel cell vehicles that have been sold into the California market. I mentioned earlier that we had built the first ever liquid hydrogen production facility to provide renewable hydrogen into the state. And that was specific in working with the automotive companies to facilitate the introduction of those vehicles.
What's the cost of a hydrogen vehicle?
I can't speak to the exact cost today. I think that depending on the model and the make, you're in the $50,000 to $60,000 range today.
And they're quite heavy as well, correct?
And no, they're quite light, actually.
They are?
They're much lighter than, for example, a battery-powered electric vehicle.
Right. Well, the electric vehicles are a lot heavier than the vehicles we have.
Their weight would be comparable to the weight you have in other vehicles today.
Okay, all right, thank you. Mr. Merkley? Senator Fetterman? Senator Stabenow?
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, and thank you to all of you for being here. And I will say on the issue of hydrogen, I know that there's joint ventures, partnerships going on right now in Michigan and we're with the Army and so on in terms of development of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, and there's having great success on a number of fronts. So let me start out, though, Mr. Cooper, and let me just say that as we look at transitions, and I'm all for transitions, and I want to see us get to electric vehicles. I'm currently driving the Michigan-made Chevy Bolt. I think it's the most affordable American-made vehicle right now in terms of electric vehicles. Love it. It's here. I love it. But I know that the reality is that our cars are lasting longer than ever, and even as we transition and all the structures and the things that need to happen, that the U.S. fleet's going to be comprised of hundreds of millions of internal combustion engines for years to come. So this really is important for us to understand all of this as we transition. So if we're going to meet our national climate targets, do you agree that we must secure a robust supply of low and zero carbon liquid fuels to complement the push towards electrification?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator, and I absolutely agree that yes, we need to embrace the use of low-carbon liquid fuels. I mean, if we're serious about reducing greenhouse gas emissions as quickly as possible, we can't wait around for full electrification of the fleet. That's going to take decades, as you pointed out. There are roughly 270 million light-duty vehicles, cars, pickups, SUVs, and vans. Today, 1% of those are electric vehicles. So it's going to take decades for that transition to occur, and we should be taking steps now to further decarbonize those liquid fuels that we know are going to be, you know, as you said, hundreds of billions of gallons of liquid fuels will be needed in the decades ahead in these vehicles. So we think a clean fuel standard is a great way to do that and really jumpstart that decarbonization of our liquid fuels.
And I'm assuming you do not think it's instead of a renewable fuel standard, that this is about complementing?
That's correct. A well-done clean fuel standard would complement a renewable fuel standard, which really creates the foundation and the kind of the bedrock for the renewable fuels industry.
Could you speak a little bit about the recent investments that we have made, Congress has made, including those in the Inflation Reduction Act, that are going to help us be able to achieve these goals?
Absolutely. Our industry is very excited about the Inflation Reduction Act and the suite of tax credits and grant programs in that legislation. It's a game changer for our industry. One of the programs in particular is Section 45Z, the Clean Fuel Production Credit, which is, in essence, the tax version of a clean fuel standard. It generates a tax credit for clean fuel producers based on the carbon intensity of their fuel. And the lower the carbon intensity, the more valuable the credit is, up to $1 per gallon. Our industry is already making investments based on the availability of that tax credit in the next few years. Along with that, we had the expansion and extension of the carbon capture and sequestration credits, a $500 million grant program for biofuels infrastructure. So yes, it was a wonderful investment and down payment in low carbon renewable fuels.
Great. I was very pleased to be able to, in the agricultural section of that bill, to have the investment in
We thank you for that.
Biofuels infrastructure. So, and you've already mentioned less carbon. I'm assuming as you talk about that, it's jobs. I hear jobs as you are talking about that as well. But I think it's also important to stress that biofuel production lowers prices at the pump. And the fact that I know this last summer, where E15 saved drivers in some areas as much as $1 a gallon. Boy, at the time when we saw prices going through the roof, that was a big deal. So I wonder if you might just speak more about how much renewable fuels save drivers at the pump.
Absolutely, and we did see it especially last summer when we had record high gas prices. ethanol was selling for about $1 to $1.25 a gallon less than gasoline at the wholesale level. So obviously, when you blend more of that lower cost product, it's going to reduce the price for the consumer. And still today, if you go to any retail gas station, the lowest cost fuel option for the consumer is going to be the fuel that has the highest content of ethanol. And we talk about California. The lowest cost fuel in the California market today is E85. It's that 85% ethanol blend. It's typically $2 to $3 a gallon less expensive than gasoline in the California market, and that's being driven by the LCFS in that marketplace.
Thank you very much. I have other questions, but my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam
Thank
Chair.
you. Now I turn to our newest senator, Senator Ricketts. Welcome to the committee, and your 5 minutes for questions.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you to all of our testifiers here today about the future of transportation fuels. And Mr. Cooper, you've got a great barber there. That joke never gets old. All right, so one of the things that I always talk about is ethanol. I always say three things. Ethanol saves consumers money at the pump. It is going to help clean up the environment, and it's going to create jobs here in America. Ethanol must be central to any discussion that we're going to have about the future of transportation fuels. And Senator Stabenow, thank you for mentioning the dollar savings in some places, because that's awesome. That's part of my talking points today too. That E10, that 10% blend of ethanol, 90% gasoline is about 98% of all the gasoline that is sold in this country. E15 and the EPA's decision to allow that last summer helped with the high inflation that people are experiencing, bring down their fuel costs. Senator Stabenow mentioned the dollar. I think the average is about 16 cents. I just filled up my gas last time I was home. It was like 40 to 45 cents a gallon on E10, helping save that. And of course, E20, E30, E85, as you mentioned, all has future potential on that. But also, as we've discussed about ethanol helping to reduce carbon emissions, the use of ethanol blended fuels led to a reduction of nearly 1 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gas emissions between 2008 and 2020. Environmental Health and Engineering found that corn ethanol is 46% less carbon intensive than gasoline. In addition, ethanol creates economic opportunities for our families, especially in Nebraska. There's over 1,000 jobs, direct jobs in Nebraska related to the ethanol industry, and it creates the demand for corn from our farmers. I would also note that the byproduct, the distillers grain, goes in to feed our livestock. So it is just a wonderful thing there. And ethanol has always fueled our trucks, cars, and other transportation vehicles along the American roads and highways. So, Mr. Cooper, I want you to talk a little bit more about, this administration, as well as the state of California, have classified electric vehicles as zero emissions. Biofuels are considered low emissions. How would a national clean fuel standard impact the use of biofuels and this new CFS? How would it work with the RFS, the Renewable Fuel Standard? Would it replace it? Would it coexist? How would that work?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. And we certainly believe that an LCFS or clean fuel standard done right at the national level would complement a renewable fuel standard. Again, the RFS was primarily about volume, right, and energy independence and reducing imports. A clean fuel standard is more directly about reducing emissions and based on performance. So we do think the two would work together very well, complement one another. And as I mentioned earlier, the RFS was really that bedrock and kind of the foundation for the renewable fuels industry, and it's important to keep that foundation in place. So we do think the two would work together. And then in terms of how the biofuels industry would respond to a clean fuel standard, we expect that it would be similar in ways to the response in the California marketplace and in Oregon. It's been interesting to see some of the different ways that the markets have responded to those programs in those states. As I mentioned, the E85 market in California is off the charts. They're using more E85 in that state than any other state in the country as an outcome of the low carbon fuel standard. They're also one of the last two states that hasn't yet approved E15. Well, guess what? They're moving toward approval of E15 because the market is calling for it via the LCFS. So we do believe a properly designed clean fuel standard, and again, doing the life cycle analysis correctly, would drive increased use of ethanol and other renewable fuels above and beyond what is called for under the renewable fuel standard.
And I think we've talked about it a little bit here. You know, I'm concerned that a national clean fuels program could prioritize electric vehicles over liquid fuel vehicles, including clean biofuels. And this will only make us more dependent on our foreign adversaries who control a majority of the worldwide production of several key components. You know, for example, the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, controls 60% of the raw lithium mines in the world, 50% of the lithium processing and refining, and 75% of the lithium-ion battery mega factories. How can you ensure that a new national low-carbon fuel standard won't falsely prop up EVs to satisfy an agenda and do significant damage to liquid fuels, including biofuels, in the process?
A great question, and thank you, Senator. Again, if the life cycle analysis is done correctly and the carbon intensity scores are developed in a fair and transparent way, we believe that renewable fuels are going to compete very well with electric vehicles in terms of the carbon reductions that they provide. And as the ranking member mentioned, internal combustion engines and conventional vehicles are far less expensive than EVs. And so, again, if you step out of the way and let the market respond to these carbon reduction requirements, we think it's going to drive the market toward increased use of renewable fuels, which are the lowest cost option of meeting these carbon reduction requirements. Now, if you stack on top of that an EV mandate or something like California is trying to do, then yeah, that changes the calculation immensely. But we, again, think a truly technology neutral standard is going to put renewable fuels in a very competitive position.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Cardin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and let me thank our three witnesses. I think it's very appropriate that our first hearing in this Congress is in regards to the future of low-carbon transportation fuels. Clearly, with Senator Merkley, we've been engaged in some of the international meetings on the climate crisis, and we have a crisis, so we need to do everything we possibly can in every aspect, and the low-carbon emission fuels is clearly part of that. I am pleased that under the bipartisan infrastructure bill, that Maryland has been able to take advantage of many of the new opportunities under the low or no emissions fuel programs. We have received 3 major grants in our state, $15 million to Montgomery County, Maryland, for new hydrogen production sites and acquiring 13 hydrogen fuel cell electric buses. In Prince George's County, $25 million for 70 zero-emission electric buses. In Anne Arundel County, $1.9 million for 4 diesel electric hybrid buses. I say that because there's 3 different technologies, but all of them are adding to our commitment to reduce our carbon footprint. And then under the Clean School Bus Program, Baltimore City is receiving $9.4 million for 25 electric school buses. So we're taking advantage of these opportunities. I know, Mr. Graff, you talked a little bit about the hydrogen issues. It's new technologies, but it has limits. So where do you see the future of hydrogen as a source for transportation energy?
Senator, thanks for the question. Hydrogen itself is a very versatile molecule. If we are going to achieve our climate objectives, if the energy transition is going to occur, it will not happen without hydrogen. The estimate is that hydrogen itself, long-term by 2050, will likely account for roughly 20% of the world's energy supply. And that versatility allows us to use hydrogen produced in a variety of different pathways to decarbonize energy-intensive industry and also to decarbonize the transportation sector. The utilization of that hydrogen, we've talked a little bit about personal vehicles, but as you grow the vehicle, as you look at commercial vehicles, as you look at the Class 8 tractors that are on the highways, if in fact we want to get to a zero-emission vehicle, in that case we are in a place where we can utilize hydrogen paired with a fuel cell, maintain the same utility you have today, the same drivability, the same refueling time, the same use regardless of temperature, and you will be able to utilize, because of the small footprint and weight of the fuel cell, along with the amount of hydrogen necessarily to go ahead and carry on board to power that, you will be able to maintain the payload you have today. So it has the capability in almost every use in the transportation sector to see that evolve. The key is to build out the infrastructure. The key is to build the need for the vehicles and see this grow and evolve as we have for other sectors.
So we took a giant step in that direction under the Inflation Reduction Act, providing certain incentives. What more needs to be done?
So the Inflation Reduction Act clearly provides the capability to produce hydrogen under a variety of pathways, whether you're utilizing renewable power or utilizing natural gas with carbon capture to produce the hydrogen at a lower cost and have the benefit of the low-carbon renewable hydrogen. The key now, given the fact that the transportation sector is one of the most difficult to decarbonize, is to go ahead and further incentivize the use to build out the vehicles and fully utilize those. As a matter of fact, I was with one of our drivers just Thursday, utilizing one of the Class A tractors we're currently using to deliver goods in the state of California between our industrial sites, which utilizes hydrogen and a hydrogen fuel cell to power it. So we just need to build the scale to get there.
Thank you. Mr. Spear, I want to get you engaged here on heavy trucks, heavy-duty trucks. I recognize that we have infrastructure challenges that are very important to the trucker and trucking industry. And I recognize we have supply chain challenges that you've already mentioned in your testimony. But how do we provide the necessary incentives so that heavy-duty trucks are also going to have themselves a smaller carbon footprint? What additional incentives do you think are necessary?
Well, I think if you want to get the newer, safer, more environmentally friendly equipment out on the road, you've got to incentivize it. And you've been a leader on this. You sponsored a bill that would repeal the federal excise tax. This is a 100-plus-year-old tax, World War I. It's the only one left of that era that still exists. And it tacks on 12% of the price of the sale of a new tractor. So that's roughly $25,000 per tractor. Now think about that. Not only is it more expensive, the impact that has on manufacturing that equipment, jobs around the country in those manufacturing facilities is quite significant. So we believe that repealing that would have a measurable impact on getting cleaner, more environmentally safe equipment out on the road quicker.
Thank you for that answer. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Cardin. We're going to move down to Senator Merkley, and I'll ask my questions a little bit later in the hearing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I wanted to start, Mr. Cooper, related to your experience with low-carbon fuel standards, and particularly the Oregon Clean Fuels Program. As you look at Oregon's program, has it been a success?
Yes, we think the Oregon program has been very successful.
Any particular insights or lessons we should take to mind as other states consider similar?
Yeah, when we think about a low-carbon fuel standard done right, we typically point to Oregon because we think the life cycle analysis and modeling and methodology that they used for their program is more transparent, is more technology neutral than what California is doing even. So yeah, we think the Oregon program has been a great example and model for the rest of the country to follow.
Yeah, thank you. And Mr. Graff, I want to turn to hydrogen and specifically that is made from fossil gas with carbon capture. The industry uses the term blue carbon or blue hydrogen, as you're familiar with. The first peer-reviewed study in 2021 found that using blue hydrogen, that is fossil hydrogen with carbon capture, was 20% more damaging in terms of greenhouse gas footprint than using fossil gas or coal directly for heating buildings, and that it was 60% worse than using diesel directly for heating buildings. Now, we have a lot of buildings heated by fossil gas and a lot that are heated by diesel. So do you agree with the studies that have shown that using fossil gas, even with carbon capture, and by the way, the assumption in this was 100% carbon capture, no leakage from a geological formation, doesn't make sense when it comes to trying to tackle greenhouse gas?
Senator, thank you for the question. I'm not familiar with that exact study, and we can certainly take a look at that and spend more time with you and your staff to talk about it. But what I know is this. We have looked at the emissions reductions and the benefits of utilizing hydrogen. For example, it could be in the state of West Virginia, it could be on the Gulf Coast, to go ahead and produce large quantities, what I would call low-carbon hydrogen. Sometimes people get confused with the various colors, and I just like to call it what it is, low-carbon hydrogen. And we are able to capture that. We are able to capture that CO2 in those geographies. And with large-scale production, like with autothermal reformers, technology that we have, we can decarbonize entire energy-intensive industrial sites. Now, if you're going to produce hydrogen only with the need, for example, to burn it in a home, then you can certainly do this same thing in order to achieve that. However, when you are located with the local infrastructure, we can drive this in a very significant way for the industries that use it. And by the way, if you utilize hydrogen in a fuel cell, it's a very, very different dynamic than a combustion engine. And so the benefits of that are very clear.
Mr. Chairman, the point I'm wanting to drive here is we often talk about with electric cars, it matters how the electricity is made. And the parallel is that it makes a big difference how the hydrogen is made. And the industry has given it the name, it sounds very nice, blue hydrogen. It sounds like the best of the best. But in fact, it's made from fossil gas, and it is, and this is the best version where carbon capture is complete. And even in that case, it is more damaging to the climate than is burning fossil gas directly for heating homes, or than using diesel for heating homes by a 60% factor. And that's assuming that every bit of carbon capture is perfect, which is rarely the case, that you can capture all the carbon out of the emissions and that you can store it for eternity underground with perfect security. So I think it's very important. The hydrogen conversation is going to be very relevant as we go forward. And when it's made from electrolysis, that is from renewable electricity being used to make it, it has a profoundly different footprint than when it's made from fracked methane gas. And so I want to make sure as we talk about hydrogen that we realize that there are many different forms that have very different life cycle footprints, and that if we go down a route that actually makes things worse in terms of substituting hydrogen for heating buildings that is made from fossil gas, and then if you say that there's no carbon capture, then it's even worse than that. So this is the best case for fossil gas using, and this is also true in terms of the production of electricity. There is much better case to be made that hydrogen for high temperature applications in industry, making that hydrogen from a clean system, making it from renewable electricity, then you have a really important application because you have hydrogen that works in settings where electricity doesn't work directly, but it's made from renewable electricity to begin with. So I just want to caution that not all hydrogen is the same, and not all hydrogen hubs would be the same. Hydrogen hubs that promote essentially making hydrogen from fossil gas have a very different footprint than those hubs that would be depending upon a clean hydrogen. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Thanks for that that cautionary note. Happy to have the opportunity. This is the first time I've gotten to introduce Senator Fetterman. He's from a state just north of us in Delaware. Delaware and Pennsylvania used to be the same state. And Delaware on June 15, 1776, declared our independence from Great Britain, and we gave Pennsylvania their independence from Delaware. And but we still have a great relationship with your state, and delighted that you've joined us in the Senate, and especially on this committee. Thanks so much. Welcome, Senator Fetterman. You're recognized. Make mic is on. Make sure his mic is on.
Excuse me. Many Pennsylvanians are employed in energy production industries. Transitioning to more clean energies is so important. Ensuring middle class workers are not being left behind in the changing economy is, I think, equally important. Are there any barriers, any specific kinds of special barriers for workers in the fossil fuel sector that, to learn skills in renewable fuel production?
Senator, I thank you for the question to begin with. The evolution of hydrogen, both from a low carbon standpoint and a renewable standpoint, as I mentioned earlier, will actually create many value added jobs in the economy. The estimate is by 2030 in the United States that the utilization of hydrogen, as projected to grow, would create about $140 billion of additional revenue in the economy and create about 700,000 value-added jobs. These are jobs that we are already beginning to build the workforce through in many states today. We are in 50 states across the country. And we are in a place where these jobs are readily available. The skills and the competencies and the capabilities are readily available. And where necessary, we will continue to go ahead and train the workers to be prepared to accept these jobs. The real benefit here is that these facilities and the use of hydrogen create for a much cleaner environment, both in terms of not just in their use in the community, but also in the workplace.
No additional questions?
No additional question. Okay, all right. We've been joined by Senator Lummis, who sent me the nicest note for my birthday last month. I saved it. I have it right here in my binder. I was going to read it aloud.
Well, I'm not sure it's nice to tell people that in Latin the term Senate means Council of Old People, and then say happy birthday. but that's, I think, what it said. So thank you.
We're only as old as we feel. I feel about 20. So let's go.
Perfect.
And you're recognized for as long as you want to be recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Spear, welcome to the committee. I have concerns that creating a national low-carbon fuel standard will only galvanize efforts to enact another anti-consumer regulatory scheme, such as phasing out liquid fuels through electrification mandates or banning heavy-duty diesel engines. Do you share this concern? And are there examples of such efforts in the states that have already enacted their own low-carbon fuel standards?
There are. Thank you, Senator. As I mentioned previously, we had litigated in California and Oregon, largely because of the impact that it would have on our industry, particularly medium-sized companies with 20 trucks or fewer, down to owner-operators. And those are folks that pay at the retail at the pump. They don't have fuel contracts. So the impact that this has on inflating the cost of diesel in those states and in those areas is quite measurable. It's the second largest cost drain under labor. And so this is a make or break issue in terms of keeping them out on the road moving freight. Those costs generally will be reflected in what consumers pay, your constituents. So it needs to be a gradual process that takes into account the fact that we are already facing 40-year highs in inflation. So this is just an additive on top and reflected in the fuel prices, $7 exceeding in California, nearly $6.50 in Oregon. Those are the highest in the country. So we definitely are going to defend our membership when that happens.
Well, President Biden recently noted in his State of the Union address that the U.S. would continue to need liquid fuels for at least the next 10 years. Is that a statement that you agree with?
I think it's going to be a little longer than 10, Senator. I really do. I believe we'll get there. As I said in my opening remarks, I firmly believe that we will transition in time, but it has to be inclusive. The timeline has to be realistic, and the targets have to be achievable for that to happen. I think this mad rush to zero is going to be very impactful, not just in state economies, but the national economies. So it's something we're very mindful. I think if we pace ourselves and let the market work its will, we will get to zero.
Well, I know people in Wyoming are concerned because electronic vehicles are tested at sea level, which Wyoming is not, tested on flat ground, which Wyoming is not, tested at 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which Wyoming rarely is. In fact, today it's 0 degrees again in Casper, Wyoming. So those factors change the distance one can travel on a charge dramatically. And I don't think that that is well understood. So hopefully we can bring some of those factors to light in the coming months. Mr. Cooper, thank you for being here as well. As you know, the EPA issued what's called their SET rule, which among other things set RVO limits for the next 3 years and proposed to create a pathway for electric vehicles participation in the RFS. I'm concerned with how the EPA is proposing that auto OEMs generate E-RINs. What's your level of concern with the E-RINs proposal from EPA?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator, and we share your concern with the way that EPA is proposing to allow electricity into the RFS program. We're not opposed to the inclusion of electricity in the RFS, but it's got to be done right. And we share your concern that in the case of these E-RINs, the generator of those credits would be the automaker, like Tesla, and that's completely different, completely inconsistent with how RIN credit generation is done across any other fuel that is regulated under the RFS. And so that gives us some concern. We're also concerned with the way that EPA would allow those automakers to benefit from what's called book and claim accounting, which is essentially, the automaker is going to sign a contract with a renewable electricity producer, could be thousands of miles away, and when that electron enters the grid, the automaker gets to claim that carbon reduction benefit from that electron, whether it ever is used to fuel an electric vehicle or not. And so we have some concerns with inconsistent application of that accounting practice.
Now, I may have to spend a little more time with you, Mr. Cooper, to better understand that, but I appreciate you making me aware of that. Do you believe EPA's proposal aligns with congressional intent when it created the RFS nearly 2 decades ago?
That is another concern we have as we look at the statutory intent of the RFS program and our understanding of that intent. It was all about stimulating the production and use of renewable fuels, not necessarily about stimulating the production and use of certain vehicle technologies. We think if you all in Congress had intended the program to drive certain vehicle technologies, you would have been more explicit about that.
And is it appropriate for EPA to combine their E-RINs rulemaking with 2023 through 2025 RVOs?
We have asked in the comments we just submitted to EPA last week that they sever that portion of the proposal or that portion of the rulemaking from the actual volume requirements. We think EPA should move ahead with finalizing those volume requirements, but it sounds like they need more time to really figure out this E-RIN proposal and to make sure they're getting it right. So we would prefer to see EPA separate those two parts of the proposal from one another.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. Thank you for helping educate and inform the committee. I yield back.
You bet. And I want to thank you for being here and join us in a good learning exercise. When I was privileged to be governor of our state, I was very active in the National Governors Association. We had something in the National Governors Association called the Center for Best Practices. They still have it. Yes, oh yes. And it was an opportunity for governors to share with other governors, other states, what was working in their respective states. And I love being part of all of that. And I know that you breathe. I think you bring the same kind of thinking to this job as we did in those days as well. So good. Thank you so much for joining us today, for your questions. I want to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the testimony of Oregon's Clean Fuels Manager, whose name, believe it or not, is Wind. How about that? Corey Ann Wind, W-I-N-D. And before the U.S. Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works that Oregon, here's what she testified, that Oregon's Clean Fuels program has spurred innovation and kept consumer costs low. And the article in the article that I referred to earlier actually spends some time elaborating on that. So good. All right, we've been joined by Senator Alex Padilla from California. Again, he comes from a state where I used to live, where I was a naval flight officer. And we always like to think of states as laboratories of democracy, and California happens to be a pretty big one, pretty big laboratory. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm delighted that you're on this hearing, on this committee, and you could come with us and join us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Proud to represent not only a great laboratory of democracy, but most populous and diverse state in the nation, largest electorate of any state in the nation, and the fourth largest economy in the world. With that being said, let me brag a little bit about California's low-carbon fuel standard. It's helping to advance a wide range of clean fuels while at the same time keeping consumer costs low and fostering clean fuel investments. California continues to grow its economy and reduce its emissions. The program's tech-neutral approach, greater long-term predictability, and cost containment mechanisms have provided certainty and flexibility. And I know prior to my opportunity to ask questions, there was a lot of California-specific comments and questions by my colleagues in the committee. But this program has been so successful that other jurisdictions are joining California, which is evident in the Pacific Coast Collaborative, a regional agreement between the states of California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia to strategically align policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and promote clean energy. My first question is for Mr. Graff. You talk about certainty, flexibility, and technological neutrality as essential ingredients to any low-carbon fuel program. Can you expand on how California's low-carbon fuel standard provides a certainty and flexibility to industry?
Senator, thank you for the question. There is no question that California's LCFS program drove the introduction of zero-emission vehicles. And the recognition that in order to go ahead and fuel those vehicles, it recognized that the real point was carbon intensity, and it was agnostic in terms of the pathways or the technologies to get there. For Air Liquide, we have a long history. It's core in our culture to be sustainable in our approach. And we see our commitment to our climate goals, the world's climate goals, as well as the energy transition, with hydrogen as a core component of delivering that. So for us, the ability to go ahead and leverage the ability to work with the automakers to provide the renewable hydrogen for the nascent development of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles was paramount in our decision to invest a $250 million liquid hydrogen plant in Nevada to meet those needs. What's important is that in that plant, we utilize both renewable power and we use biogas, the attributes of biogas, in order to produce that renewable hydrogen. As a result, we're leveraging many technologies in order to go ahead and meet the needs.
So if I heard you correctly, California's program was paramount in your decision, not just whether or not to make the investment, but where to invest in clean hydrogen production. Is that correct?
It clearly enabled the introduction of the zero-emission vehicles. We needed to demonstrate what that could mean, not just for the state of California, but for the country and the world. We wanted to find that opportunity to demonstrate what could happen, and we wanted to locate those things logistically as close to the market as possible. It's good to minimize logistics. It also creates value, creating jobs in those communities in which you're going to use that product.
Yep. Thank you. Follow-up question for Mr. Cooper. Could you elaborate on the RFA's pledge to achieve a net zero carbon footprint by 2050 and talk about how low carbon fuel standards, not just in California, let's add Oregon to the conversation, may have contributed to innovation in the biofuels sector?
Absolutely, and thank you for the question, Senator. I did mention our pledge, our members' pledge to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 or sooner in my opening remarks. And this is a pledge and a commitment that our membership is taking very seriously. They're already taking steps and making investments to reach that goal. Today, ethanol already reduces greenhouse gas emissions by about 50% compared to gasoline. So we've got, we're halfway there. But with the adoption of technologies like carbon capture and sequestration, with the adoption of lower carbon farming practices upstream of our facilities, replacing fossil natural gas with renewable natural gas at our facilities, all of those practices and technologies will continue to drive the carbon intensity lower for corn ethanol, and we absolutely think we can get there by 2050 or sooner. And a lot of those investments are happening today, and they're being driven by the California LCFS. They're being driven by the Oregon program. Again, our member producers that serve those markets, their top priority is doing everything they can to reduce the CI, the carbon intensity of those fuels. And so they are making investments, and that was the purpose of the program. And it's why we think a similar program at the national level would be a great way to rapidly reduce emissions from the transportation sector.
Thank you both. My time is up, Mr. Chair. Let me just end with this. Imagine that. Public policy, private investment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's a good note to emphasize. We've been joined by our new colleague from Oklahoma, Sir Mullen. Delighted to see you today. I just want to mention before I turn to you for your questions, this committee has a remarkable tradition for actually working together and working across the aisle to find common ground that you wouldn't really expect. I worked with John Barrasso for a number of years on something to reduce emissions of refrigerants from air conditioners and freezers and so forth. It actually led to the ratification of the Kigali Treaty and phased down hydrofluorocarbons over the next 15 years. But John Barrasso and I worked on that together for a long time. Before that, Barbara Boxer was our senior Democrat in this committee, and your predecessor, Jim Inhofe, was our senior Republican. So you could not ask for two more polar different senators, and they somehow managed to find common ground on any number of issues. To our amazement, including transportation policy, but other stuff as well. Jim and I were co-sponsors of the Diesel Emission Reduction Act for any number of years. So that's something we're proud of on this committee, and it's a wonderful tradition. We hope that we can continue to take advantage of it, and with your presence. But welcome aboard. We're delighted to hear from you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to that. I look forward to getting to know everybody and finding those places we can work and use good common sense. I'd love to have been involved in the conversation with refrigerant, considering I've owned several HVAC companies, and I have a pretty strong opinion on the direction, just because from practical use, right? But I appreciate that, and it's an honor being on the committee. Sorry about sliding in here late. I'm still trying to find where the committees are, so.
You're right on time, and the restroom is right outside the door. So
I figured that one.
I got that
one. I was in the Armed Service Committee, and was since I'm on the back side of that panel, it took a while to get there. I'd like to visit a little bit with Mr. Spear. California, obviously, they're proposed replacing the diesel trucks with battery electric vehicles and trucks on the road. For the Air Source, obviously, board. What has this meant for the prices of vehicles?
Oh, it's putting immense pressure on the sale of new vehicles, but also used trucks.
Right.
Significant costs in making equipment newer, safer, more environmentally friendly equipment less available as a result. They're just out of reach.
Right. Well, as a guy that has a CDL in my back pocket, I've owned multiple semis. We've had fleets of vehicles out there. I've driven in California, and traffic's pretty bad, right? Yeah. And so if you put these diesel trucks, which are already heavy, they take up a lot of room, and then you make them all electric, has anybody done a study on how many more trucks that's going to add to the road? Because we have weight issues already, right? And so we kind of got two options here. Either we increase the weights of these vehicles that they can move, which could drastically affect safety, or we're going to have to literally put 3 to 1 on the road just to be able to move the same product we're moving now. Has anybody done the study on that and what congestion that's going to cause? And honestly, how much bigger of a carbon footprint that's going to put on California?
Yeah, the American Transportation Research Institute's done some pretty significant recent studies on this subject and the impact that it's going to have. And looking logically at the availability of minerals to create those batteries, these are 5,000-pound batteries or more going into these trucks. And the amount of lithium, graphite, cobalt that has to go into these batteries to process that, it's not readily available. We're not sourcing that here in the U.S. Not going to come from China. It's going to come from Congo. I mean, that needs to be decided in terms of availability of the equipment.
Right.
Beyond that, the infrastructure to charge it, not in place. And then the amount of electricity needed to charge it. ATRA did this study, and they're showing that to charge all trucks and cars currently on the road would be 40% of current capacity.
Right.
I mean, think about that. Where's the power gonna come from, especially in California where there's already rolling, blackouts? So, this is a question that we believe has to be answered before you move forward with such an aggressive timeline. That's also, by the way, not just confined to California. It's gonna set the national standard for the entire country if the EPA doesn't step in. So we need a national framework. We're interstate commerce. You've driven across the country in a truck. You understand that.
And Chris, to your point, for the reference of those that are listening, the average house has a 200 amp service that goes to every house. To charge 2 vehicles overnight, these aren't semis. And we're talking about infrastructure here. Just to charge, the average household has 2 vehicles. To charge those vehicles overnight, you would require to take a 200 amp service house to a 400 amp service house. Now, as someone that owned a fleet of 300 plus vehicles on the road every day, I can't imagine how much power it cost me at night to charge all those trucks. And this is something that's short-sighted when we start talking about California's proposals. I understand what they're trying to get to, but are we thinking long range? Are we actually paying attention to the safety, the effects on the grid? Last time I checked, they still have rolling blackouts without going all electric.
That's right.
So where's that infrastructure going to come from? And sir, as you say, we work together. This is a point that we need to have a deep discussion on, because when we start talking about renewable fuels versus fossil fuels, there seems to be somewhat a divide. But we need to be realistic to our approach. And I'm glad that you started your introduction to the committee for me in this, because I want to be part of a solution, not of a problem. The Choctaws, who I have a privilege to represent, Choctaw Nation, and I'm Cherokee and proud to be Cherokee. The Chief Batten, he says that when we think of decisions, we think generational, not today, but we think generational. And in this effect, we need to be thinking about both the effect today and generational, what our long-term goals are. So I look forward to working on the committee. Thank you guys for being here, and with that, I'll yield back.
All right, thanks. And thanks again, and welcome to our committee. Before you arrived here, I just wanted to mention this again. I mentioned that I was born in West Virginia, coal mining town. That's where my sister and I were born, and sort of I grew up until we moved to Virginia and then off into the world. But I've always focused on job creation, job preservation. As governor, even before that, I worked in the Division of Economic Development, always focused on job creation, job preservation. Continue to do that. I always look at adversity and find opportunity. And there's plenty of adversity in our country and our planet. And where's the opportunity for doing something about it? My mom raised my sister and me in a Grace Gospel Baptist Church. She dragged us there every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night, most Thursday nights. And then we'd go home and watch Billy Graham on TV. I mean, and she wanted to make sure we understood.
Wait, you all have a TV?
It was a little tiny when we had 3 channels. But she wanted to make sure we understood the difference between right and wrong. She really wanted to make sure we internalize the golden rule, treat other people the way we want to be treated. I mentioned earlier, my state of Delaware is the lowest lying state in America. Our state is sinking. The seas around us are rising. If Bill Cassidy and John Neely Kennedy were here today, they'd tell you in every 100 minutes in Louisiana, they lose a piece of land the size of a football field to the ocean. And NOAA, the folks at NOAA told us last year that sea level rise isn't just a problem today, it's going to get worse before it gets better. So that's sort of the environment in which we're operating here. And we've somehow got to find consensus and to address these problems, these concerns in a way that's fair, but also in a way that strengthens our economy rather than diminishes it. Delaware used to be the state that built more cars, trucks, vans per capita than any state in America. We had a Chrysler plant with 4,000 employees. We had a GM plant with 4,000 employees. I worked for years to keep those plants alive. And we lost them both in the Great Recession, and which was just really, you can mind, a body blow to a little state with less than a million people. I would just say that when we decided to, Chrysler decided to close their plant, and I remember being there the day they literally tore down the plant and leveled it to the ground. I nearly cried. But we have in the site that used to have 4,000 employees. We have 4,000 people go to work every day in the science technology campus that's affiliated with the University of Delaware. So in adversity lies opportunity. We have just to be smart enough to figure out how to get there. And the way we do it on this committee is just being honest with each other, working with each other, thinking outside the box, looking to see what works, and trying to do more of that. I remember going to the Detroit Auto Show. We used to go every year to the Detroit Auto Show, and I remember one year being there, and they call them stands, and every auto producer has a stand. Like GM has a stand, Ford has a stand. Some stands are bigger than others. They have all kinds of different models and trucks and so forth and vehicles. One year, I remember being meeting a woman named Mary Barra. Mary Barra got pretty famous now. She's the chairman of GM, chairs the Business Roundtable. And it was a year that the Ford Volt was selected as a car of the year. And it's a hybrid. And the Ford Volt that year got 38 miles on a charge, 38 miles on a charge. And the vehicle I drive now, I mentioned earlier my 2001 Chrysler Town & Country minivan, which I sold for $1 last year with 600,000 miles on it. But it's been replaced by an EV that gets 300 miles on a charge. And it's the numbers are actually getting better. But 10 years ago, I was when the Chevrolet Volt won a car of the year at the Detroit Auto Show. I remember walking around and visiting one of the stands. I don't know if it was Toyota, who it was, but they had a vehicle in it looked like a framework with 2x4s framed into a garage. And they had a vehicle sitting in the garage, and next to it was a framing for a house. And I said to the people from the company that had that vehicle, I said, "What is this?" And they said, "This is a car that's sitting in a garage and has the ability not only to use hydrogen and fuel cells to provide electricity for the vehicle, provide electricity for the house, cool the house in winter, warm the house in the summer." They said, "This is where we're going to go in the future." And like 10 years later, that's a reality. So there's a lot we can do here, and a lot of ways to create jobs. And I'm all about jobs. I think the best thing we could do is, I used to say in my speeches, I talk about the least of these in our society, and I'd say, if you give a person a fish, you feed them for a day. If you teach a person to fish, they can feed themselves for a lifetime. I used to say that was in the Bible. One day I'd say that in a speech, and there's a minister there, and he said to me after my speech, that that's not in the Bible. So, but, well, I say it should be. It should be.
It's been quoted a lot, that was.
There you go.
Mr. Chairman, may I remark on your comments? Well, one of the things during the State of the Union address, when President Biden mentioned this 1-decade goal, I thought about how without permitting reform, we don't stand a chance, because one of the largest wind energy facilities in the country has been developed in Wyoming by Philip Anschutz. And it took him over 10 years just to acquire the transmission line right away. And there's additional permitting that needs to be done there. So even for people who desire to move to electric vehicles and that can power houses and out of the garage, if there's no electricity available, it is because of the permitting burdens that come with building transmission lines, it's just an unachievable goal. So I think that even for people who aspire to President Biden's goal, that should become a priority.
I agree.
Thank
you know,
you.
President Biden, when we ended up voting on permitting reform, as you'll recall, at the end of last year, we ended up not passing it on a 47-47 vote. And President, I think, worked very hard to try to get it adopted. And I expect the administration will come back and say, let's try to give it another try. He'd like to say, and as you may recall in his State of the Union address, he kept coming back to the phrase, let's finish the job we've begun. And it's all well and good that we have a lot of promising ways to create electricity without worsening our carbon situation here in this country. But if we create all this clean energy, we'll say over here, and we have a real in our country, and over here we have a lot of people who need that energy. We got to figure out how to get it there. And your point is well taken. I think this is an area where we can find consensus and should work hard to do it. I know Senator Capito has offered legislation on this front, and I'm hopeful that we can all be part of getting to that consensus. So thank you. Okay, I have a couple more questions. Let me just either of you want to ask another question or say anything else? No? Okay, that in mind. Let's see, hold on just 1 second. As a recovering governor, this is a question for Mr. Graff and Mr. Cooper. And as a recovering governor, I often look to states for policies that work. I've mentioned this before, but today there are states that have implemented or are in the process of considering that technology-neutral, low-carbon fuel standards that provide greater flexibility and certainty than the renewable fuel standard. For example, as we heard last year from, again, Ms. Corey Ann Wind, that's a great name, isn't it? Corey Ann Wind, Oregon's Clean Fuels Program Manager. Oregon has successfully advanced cleaner fuel usage, kept consumer costs low, and helped to foster local job creation. Oregon is tracking consumer fuel costs as a requirement of the program, and Oregon has lower fuel prices than surrounding states such as Idaho, which does not have a clean fuels program. The question, if I can, for Mr. Graff, for you, and also Mr. Cooper, for you. What are the most important principles of lessons learned from state programs that should guide development of a national clean fuels program? And how are these state programs protecting the interests of consumers? Please, Mr. Graff, would you go first?
Mr. Chairman, thanks for the question. As I said in my opening remarks, I think that any program in itself, first of all, needs to have clear certainty. That is to say, if in fact we are going to make major investments as a country or as a business into the infrastructure, into the production capability to provide for renewable fuels, for low-carbon fuels, we need to have certainty as to the future. Because when we invest for the long term. These facilities will be in operation for 15, 20, 40, 50 years. The second thing is, I think, flexibility. That is the ability to choose the right solution for that ecosystem. If you have abundant wind power, solar power, hydropower, for example, you can produce hydrogen with electrolysis using water. If you have an abundant supply of natural gas and the capability to store carbon in subsurface geological structures like you do in West Virginia or on the Gulf Coast, then you can utilize hydrogen with carbon capture in order to produce that hydrogen. And by the way, the byproduct natural gas liquids you produce are critical and necessary to the local economy to preserve the jobs and grow the jobs in the chemical industry. So that's critical in terms of the versatility and the flexibility of what you need to have. And then the final piece is around technology. We don't want to pick or choose specifically what technology to apply in a rule or a law. We want to give the companies, we want to give the ability to go ahead and pick and choose what makes the most sense, whether it's renewable power, whether it's biogas, whether it's hydrogen with carbon capture, whatever the case may be, and to build that at the appropriate scale to meet the needs of the local economy.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Jeff?
Thank you, Senator. And I think my list would be pretty similar to what we heard from Mr. Graff. I think.
Let me say repetition's a good thing. Feel free to repeat.
I won't repeat. But I will say, setting clear and predictable carbon intensity reduction requirements is very important, and then sticking to them, not backtracking or changing them retroactively. And then secondly, life cycle analysis is critically important under a program like this. It's those carbon intensity values for each fuel pathway that really is the engine that drives the program. So having a consistent, transparent, science-based life cycle methodology is critical to the whole thing. And again, that's why we think the Department of Energy's GREET model is a great example that, for that type of methodology.
All right, thanks. I'm going to pick on Mr. Graff again for a minute here, and that's a question of dealing with energy security. Recent price spikes in petroleum prices, particularly following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, all those prices at the pump, as I've seen witnesses as recently as this morning in my neighborhood. But they demonstrate that global markets continue to drive fuel prices. The volatile global oil market creates economic uncertainty. It puts pressure on American families and businesses that no amount of domestic drilling can prevent. I believe the solution to high oil prices and dependence on foreign oil is to reduce demand for oil and transition away from oil over time, while giving consumers more choices to fuel our cars, our trucks, and our vans. Fortunately, clean hydrogen is an example of a low-carbon fuel that can be produced domestically from renewable fuel resources like wind, like solar, like biomass. My question is, how can the use of hydrogen, and low-carbon transportation fuels help strengthen our national energy security? I'm going to repeat it. How can the use of hydrogen and low-carbon transportation fuels help to strengthen our national energy security?
Thanks for the question, Mr. Chairman. And as you point out, the world's energy needs only continue to grow. The inherent risks of various energy supplies continue to evolve. And I think we should see everything we have today as additive, with the idea that hydrogen and its long-term growth and potential will help fill both a necessary void and provide the growth in low-carbon and renewable sources of energy that we need for the future. The application, again, of hydrogen in the use of hydrogen, again, is very versatile because it provides the capability in an industrial setting to decarbonize and provide the needs for energy-intensive industry. And we're already beginning to demonstrate that with some of our projects we are building around the world. But it also provides the flexibility and the capability to decarbonize the transportation sector and provide the additional fueling needs we need for that infrastructure. We already had a conversation about personal vehicles, the introduction of those vehicles, and how it's used. As you scale those vehicles into a commercial vehicle or a Class 8 tractor trailer, the utilization of hydrogen is a primary and a core vector that will allow us to decarbonize heavy transportation. And in its use, it has basically this—
Did you say carbonize heavy or decarbonize?
Decarbonize.
Thank you.
As we look to go ahead and think about its utilization, which is similar to everything we have today. If you utilize hydrogen in any of these vehicles, regardless of their size, you have the same range of drivability. You have the same utilization. That is to say, in refueling, it is the same experience you have today. You don't have to wait hours to recharge. It is the same experience you have today. If you were to still have your minivan and you had to fill it with fuel, it would be—
Don't let my wife hear you say this.
It would be the same. It would be the same experience in refueling a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. The inherent drivability, irregardless of temperature, is paramount. It doesn't matter where you are. We had a conversation on this earlier. Temperature is not an issue for a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle and its performance. And at the end of the day, the inherent weight and the size of the array necessary for just the fuel cells and the full charge of hydrogen is comparable to what we have today. It doesn't require additional weight. It doesn't require additional size from an array standpoint, so you can maintain the same type of payload you have today. So I think all this is additive, substitutive, and we are able to go ahead and demonstrate its versatility in almost every sector, including if you wanted to back up power and you want to back up the grid.
Okay. Just a quick follow-up, if I could, Mr. Graf. I mentioned earlier, you may recall, Consumer Reports supports a clean fuel standard because it can, this is their quote from Consumer Reports, help alleviate high gas prices by providing more fuel options for consumers that are not tied directly to fluctuating oil prices, close quote. Mr. Graf, do you agree with Consumer Reports on this point? Could a technology-neutral clean fuel standard actually lead to lower costs for consumers?
I think anytime you have a market-based, flexible program that allows you to utilize any technology as long as it meets the requirements will create the lowest cost solution to the consumer. At the end of the day, the consumer wants power to be, or fuel to be available. It wants it to be as low cost as possible, and clearly they want it to be cleaner. And so I think that the affordability, the availability, and the ability to go ahead and provide cleaner fuels is paramount as we think about where we're going to go in the world around us.
Good, thanks. I have a question for the entire panel. Before I do, I want to just take a couple of minutes and give Chris Spear a chance to comment, especially on the, if you would, Chris, on the potential for hydrogen with respect to, large vehicles, trucks, vans, and the semis, buses. My hope is that there's a future there that would involve hydrogen. The cleaner, the better. But are we barking up the wrong tree, or is there something to this?
No, not at all. I think we've got a tremendous amount of innovation that's occurring within our industry, and a lot of that is domestic innovation. Our trucks are largely manufactured here in the United States, even foreign flag carriers. So it's a very exciting space. And I appreciate Michael's comments across the board. We too are tech neutral. Our industry will gravitate to different types of energy sources, fuel sources that fit their business models. So I mentioned drayage. Starting in the ports where the equipment is confined, electrifying there makes a lot of sense. Don't do it too fast. A lot of that equipment's old, and a lot of the people servicing those boxes are 20 trucks or less operations. So if you go too quickly, and the cost of electric truck or now hydrogen truck, as they come online, are much, much higher in price. So you've got to let parity work its course. That's why I keep coming back to the timeline. My comments about California and Oregon they're not rhetorical. It's factual. If you've got a timeline and a target that is that aggressive in an economy that size, fourth largest economy in the world, we service that. If you want us to keep servicing that and providing those goods to consumers, your all's constituents, you've got to build in time to do it. Those wins that we've had with the EPA took 40 years to get 98.5% of the tailpipe emissions out, and we're committed to the remaining 1.5. So moving to electric, moving to hydrogen, these are emerging technologies that will take time, but they're very exciting. Senator Lummis was talking about Wyoming. I'm from Wyoming, Jeff's from Wyoming. It's a very different climate, and it's going to have different conditions, different applications. Hydrogen has tremendous potential for longer haul, not affected by cold or heat. It's a very, very exciting technology for us beyond electric. So we'll get there. As I said in my opening remarks, it's just going to take a little bit more time than some states are providing.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to last questions for the entire panel, and I want to start off with Jeff Cooper. But Jeff, here's the question. First, I do appreciate the perspectives that all of you, this entire panel, have shared with us today, and I hope that the dialogue can help further inform thoughtful action to support the development of national clean fuels policy that will reduce emissions from our transportation sector and help further grow our economy at the same time. That said, I also recognize the challenges in developing a new program that satisfies everyone, and we'll need compromise and collaboration as we go along that road. My question was, would you just take a moment and share with us where you believe there is common ground amongst you as a panel? I'm always looking for common ground. So where would the common ground lie here on this panel? I think I've heard it, but I want you to sort of close with that thought in mind. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I think this has been a wonderful conversation and very enlightening. I do think I've heard lots of common ground amongst the three of us today around the need to continue innovating and continue looking at and investing in technologies that reduce carbon emissions, that reduce dependence on petroleum and imports in particular, and that continue to stimulate investment and innovation and new technologies. I think that's one area where we're all in agreement, and I think a clean fuel standard, again, if properly structured, would do that.
Good, thank you. Mr. Spear, Chris.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you and I have had conversations on this, other members of this committee and staff. We're all in on this. We start with yes. I think we've demonstrated that over the last 40 years with the EPA. We need to collaborate, public and private, setting standards that are achievable. So the timelines and the targets do matter. What I hear that's common amongst this panelists is tech neutrality and market-driven. And to do that, you have to be inclusive. You have to be transparent. Our industry serves 72.5% of the domestic freight in this country. So there's really nothing that we eat, drink, or wear that did not at some point touch a truck. And 3.8 million drivers out there making it happen. So it's a very proud industry. It's a hardworking industry. It's one that we need to keep around as an economy. And so going at the right pace and hitting the right targets, we will get there. I'm convinced of that. And working with our partners at this table, we're committed to doing that. And we'll help this committee achieve those goals.
Great. Thank you so much. Mr. Rapp, closing thought, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the rest of the panel for their thoughts today as well. I fully agree with the other panelists. I think there's very common agreement, first of all, on the need for clarity, for certainty, for flexibility, and for the ability to innovate on various technologies in order to meet the end-use consumer's needs and in order to meet the country's needs. I think all of us here and the organizations we represent or company we represent are clearly committed to the long-term prominence of the U.S., whether that's in innovation, which has been core to the U.S. since its founding, and the benefits that brings, whether it's to go ahead and recognize that the U.S. is clearly, from an energy standpoint, the world leader of production, and from the standpoint of the future of the willingness to innovate, to demonstrate we're not only the energy leader today, but we will be the clean energy leader in the world in the future as well. But most importantly, to make sure that in everything we do, whether that's meeting the economic needs of the country, meeting the economic needs of the various representatives here and the businesses we represent, is to give back to the community, to make sure we keep our own employees, but more importantly, communities in mind of what we do, and that we are able to go ahead, give back in those communities, we're able to create jobs in those communities, and clearly maintain those jobs and grow the value-added jobs that we can create in the world around us. If we continue to manage all that in balance, if we continue to go ahead and drive that in the right way, we will continue to propel the U.S. as we all know it.
Great thoughts. Great thoughts. Thank you. We're indebted to each of you. Thank you for spending this time and sharing your ideas with us and helping to further cultivate an atmosphere to find consensus in an incredibly important issue. I am going to make a couple of unanimous consent requests before we let you escape. And I would ask unanimous consent to enter the record announcements from Volvo, from Tesla, from Nikola about their plans to roll out electric big rigs with 350 to 500 mile range. Let me say that again. I want to make sure I got that right. They plans of these three manufacturers to roll out electric large rigs with 350, 500 mile range. That's quite a bit. Volvo's looking to have half of their truck sales by electric by looks like 2030. Proving electric heavy-duty vehicle technology is advancing quickly, and I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record announcements from those companies. I'd also like to ask unanimous consent for the record to submit various articles, reports, and other documents that help demonstrate the benefits of the federal program to help provide uncertainty, predictability, and flexibility for all stakeholders while lowering costs for consumers, spurring clean fuel technology innovation, and helping to meet our climate emissions reductions goals. True confession. I was born in West Virginia, a coal mining town. Grew up in Danville and Roanoke. All my life as a kid, I love cars. Love cars, trucks, and vans. As a little boy, and as a teenager, and even as a big boy today. And it's been a passion of mine. I'm an Ohio State graduate, love Ohio State, but I love Detroit. I'm a huge Tigers fan. I was on the phone earlier this week with Chris Ilitch, the owner of the Tigers, talking about our team and pitchers and catchers reporting above. So this is something that's just part of my DNA. The other thing that's part of my DNA is trying to find consensus and common ground, trying to make sure that the people that are they're being born today are going to have a planet to grow up on and a planet to grow old on. And as they grow up and grow old, they'll have jobs that they'll enable them to support themselves and their families. I mentioned earlier, I used to love to go to the Detroit Auto Show. They've always had it in January, and some of you may have been there. It's always cold, and they've moved the Detroit Auto Show now to June or July, and now we have the auto show here in the winter. And they invited me to come by and speak at the DC Auto Show last month, and I was struck by, as I walked around and looked at the vehicles that were being offered at the auto show, and thinking about like 10 years ago. When I was starting to first think about maybe buying an electric vehicle, being at the Detroit Auto Show, we had the Chevrolet Volt. It was a hybrid. It got like 38 miles on a charge, and but I'd walk around like the year after that, and after that, and after that, and there just wasn't much coming along in terms of electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. Boy, there is now. I was stunned when I walked around the showroom, a huge showroom for the DC Auto Show. There's so many, and it's not just little cars, and it's SUVs, and it's minivans like my old Chrysler minivan, all kinds of vehicles that are being offered these days. And it was exciting to see, and a lot of them are being built right here in America. This is a glass half full deal. This is a glass half full deal. It's not going to be easy to get from here where we need to go, but it's imperative that we do that. I'll close with a quick story about Albert Einstein that I occasionally share in this committee. So hopefully that you will not have heard it. I take the train to work. I take the train to go home most days, and love the train. Love Amtrak. Used to be on the Amtrak board. Bill Clinton put me on the Amtrak board and gave me a chance to help fashion, form the future of passenger rail in our country a little bit. But this weekend, my wife and I gone up to New York City to celebrate the birthday of one of our sons. And on our way back, we stopped at a train stop where Albert Einstein used to get on and off the train. And I used to teach at Princeton. And as we stopped at Princeton, the train station, and I was reminded of an Albert Einstein story about that he got on the train to go someplace. And sometimes he'd go to New York City, he'd go to Washington, wherever he would go. One day he got on the train and got to a seat and started looking for his train ticket. And he looked in his pants, he looked in his coat, he looks in his briefcase, he couldn't find it. And the conductor comes along, he sees that Albert Einstein's in some duress, and he said, Dr. Einstein, we know who you are. You don't have to worry about it. Don't just forget about your ticket. That's okay. And the conductor turned around to walk out of the car to leave, and he turned around just before he went into the other car. Albert Einstein was down on his hands and knees looking for his ticket. Conductor rushes back to Albert Einstein. He says, Dr. Einstein, you don't have to do this. We know who you are. We know who you are. You ride the train all the time. He said, we know who you are. Dr. Einstein looked up and said, I know who I am, too. I just don't know where I'm going. I just don't know where I'm going. I've got a pretty good idea. I think we all have a pretty good idea where we're going. And there's a smart way to get there. And there's a less smart way to get there. And the smart way to get there is to figure out how to work together to get to where we all need to go. And one of the ways we'll do that is by learning from those. It could be some states or jurisdiction where they've taken a wrong approach, and we'll learn from their mistakes. And there'll be others where they're onto something good. And we want to learn from both. We want to learn from both, and your testimony today helps get us on the right path, I think, and we appreciate it very, very much. All right, now I have a closing statement here somewhere. All right. In closing, I want to again thank our witnesses for your time and for your testimony today. Clean fuels help safeguard our nation's energy security, boost economic opportunity for our farmers, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's been over 15 years since Congress passed significant revisions to the renewable fuel standard. And since then, American ingenuity and innovation in clean vehicle and clean fuel technology has advanced further than I think a lot of us would have imagined. And with that in mind, I think it's time to revisit our national fuels policy. I know this is not an easy issue to tackle. My dad used to say, you probably remember things your parents said to you. And one of the things my dad used to say to us is the hardest things to do are sometimes some of the things that are most worth doing. So it's not an easy one, but it's an important one. If we want to reach our energy security and our climate goals. As I said earlier, my hope is that today's conversation will be the start of more conversations between my colleagues and us and our other stakeholders and what a national fuels program could look like, should look like. Before we adjourn, some housekeeping. Senators will be allowed to submit written questions for the records through the close of business on Wednesday, March 1st. We'll compile those questions. We'll send them to each of you. We would ask you to try to reply to us by midnight, March 1st. No, I'm just kidding. We'll ask you to reply to us by Wednesday, March 15th. Wednesday, March 15th. And with that, with no further ado, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you all.